Don't wish it were easier. Wish you were better. Jim Rohn. Most people never say it out loud, but somewhere deep inside them, there's a quiet disappointment that follows them through life. It's there when they wake up tired even after sleeping. It's there during the drive home after another long day. It's there in the silence after everyone else has gone to bed. A strange feeling that life somehow became heavier than they expected. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just exhausting. And the painful part is, most people spend years believing the problem is the world around them. The economy, their age, their bad luck, the pressure, the betrayal, the responsibilities, the timing, the stress. They wait for things to become easier. But life rarely does. And that's the truth most people spend decades avoiding. Because one day you realize, the weight never disappears. The bills don't stop. People still disappoint you. Your body still ages. Time still moves frighteningly fast. And the world never pauses long enough for you to finally feel ready. That's why Jim Rohn once said something so brutally simple. Don't wish it were easier. Wish you were better. At first, it sounds like motivation, but it isn't. It's something much deeper. It's a warning, a confrontation, a painful realization about human nature itself. Because most suffering does not come from difficulty. It comes from weakness meeting difficulty. And that changes everything. Because suddenly the question is no longer, why is life so hard? The real question becomes, why have I stayed the same for so long? And that question is dangerous. Because once a person asks it honestly, life can never look the same again. Especially for men who quietly carry pressure every single day. Men who feel responsible for everyone but themselves. Men who learned how to survive, but never learned how to live peacefully. Men who wake up every morning already mentally tired. Who smile during conversations while carrying invisible panic inside their chest. Who feel behind in life but pretend they're fine. Who fear becoming ordinary. Who fear wasting their remaining years. Who secretly wonder whether they already did. There's a reason this feeling becomes stronger after 30. Because youth hides consequences. When you're young, you can waste time and still feel infinite possibility ahead of you. But eventually something changes. You begin noticing time differently. You start measuring life in years instead of dreams. You suddenly realize 5 years can disappear almost instantly. You look in the mirror longer. You think about your parents aging. You notice your body recovering slower. You notice how exhausted you've become from carrying emotional weight nobody sees. And one terrifying thought starts appearing more often. What if this is who I stay? That thought destroys people quietly. Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, over years. Because human beings can survive pain far easier than hopelessness. And hopelessness is born when someone stops believing they can change. That's why many adults slowly become emotionally numb. Not because they're lazy, not because they're stupid, but because disappointment repeated long enough becomes identity. And identity is powerful. A man can survive failure, but once he starts calling himself a failure, his entire behavior changes. That's the psychological trap almost nobody notices. People think actions create identity, but identity also creates actions. A man who believes he lacks discipline will unconsciously protect that belief. A man who sees himself as weak avoids difficult situations because difficulty threatens his fragile self-image. A man who secretly believes life defeated him stops trying long before he admits it aloud. And over time, avoidance becomes personality. This is why some people stay stuck for decades. Not because change is impossible, but because their mind became emotionally attached to who they've been, even if that identity hurts them. Human beings are strange like that. Familiar suffering often feels safer than unfamiliar growth. That's why people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, habits destroying them, lives shrinking them, because at least it feels known, predictable, safe. But there's something deeply tragic about living safely while your spirit slowly dies. And you can feel it. You can feel it in men who stopped dreaming years ago, in fathers who only survive paycheck to paycheck, in exhausted workers staring blankly during lunch breaks, in people scrolling endlessly at night because silence forces them to confront themselves. The modern world created a dangerous form of suffering, not survival suffering, psychological suffering. People are physically alive, but emotionally disconnected from themselves. And one reason this happens is because modern life encourages comfort more than strength. Everything is designed to reduce friction. Instant entertainment, instant food, instant distraction, instant dopamine. But there's a hidden cost to easy living. Comfort weakens emotional endurance, and weak people suffer more from reality. That's the irony. People chase comfort to escape pain, but excessive comfort makes them less capable of handling pain when it inevitably arrives. And pain always arrives. Loss arrives. Failure arrives. Illness arrives. Rejection arrives. Loneliness arrives. Aging arrives. Life eventually tests everyone. Not because life is cruel, but because struggle is part of being human. Stoic philosophers understood this thousands of years ago. They believed the quality of your life depends less on external events and more on the strength of your internal world. Because two men can experience the same hardship, and one collapses while the other transforms, the event is identical. The inner structure is different. That's why emotionally resilient people often appear calm during chaos. Not because life is easier for them, but because they became stronger than the pressure. Most people misunderstand strength. They imagine loud confidence, aggression, dominance. But real strength is quieter. Real strength is waking up when you don't feel like it, keeping promises to yourself, controlling impulses, remaining calm under stress, continuing despite uncertainty, doing difficult things repeatedly without applause. That kind of strength changes a human being from the inside out. Because discipline is not punishment. Discipline is self-respect in action. And this is where Jim Rohn's message becomes uncomfortable, because it removes excuses gently, but completely. It forces you to realize your future depends less on circumstances than your response to them. That realization can feel heavy at first, because blaming life feels easier than confronting yourself. But blame is seductive precisely because it protects the ego. If life is entirely responsible for your suffering, then you never have to change. You never have to evolve. You never have to admit you became passive. But eventually reality exposes everyone. And time exposes people brutally. Years reveal whether someone developed themselves or merely aged. There's a difference, a massive difference. Some people become wiser with age. Others simply become older versions of their bad habits. Older complainers, older procrastinators, older victims, older strangers to themselves. And perhaps the saddest part is this. Many people don't realize they're disappearing until their spirit already feels distant. You see it late at night sometimes, when someone sits alone after everyone else is asleep, and suddenly the distractions stop. The television stops. The scrolling stops. The noise stops. And for a few terrifying moments, they meet themselves honestly. Not the version they show the world, the real version. the tired version, the disappointed version, the version carrying regret. And regret is one of the heaviest emotional experiences a human being can carry. Because regret is not just pain about the past, it's grief for the person you could have become. That's why wasted potential hurts so deeply. You mourn a life that never happened, a stronger version of yourself, a calmer version, a disciplined version, a courageous version, a version that existed only in imagination because fear kept interrupting action. And fear is complicated. People think fear always screams, but often fear whispers quietly. It whispers, "Start tomorrow. You're too late. You're too old. You'll fail again. You're not that kind of person." And eventually those whispers shape identity. Until a man no longer says, "I failed." He says, "I am a failure." That single shift destroys lives. Because identity always seeks evidence to confirm itself. Behavioral psychology proves this repeatedly. People unconsciously act in alignment with who they believe they are, which means transformation requires something deeper than motivation. It requires identity reconstruction. You don't just change habits, you change self-perception. And that process is deeply uncomfortable because growth demands psychological death. The old version of you must become unacceptable. The excuses must stop feeling convincing. The procrastination must stop feeling harmless. The avoidance must stop feeling safe. And that moment usually arrives quietly. Not during some cinematic breakthrough. Not during a motivational seminar. Usually it happens in ordinary silence. A tired morning. A lonely drive. A hospital visit. A birthday. A financial scare. A mirror reflection that suddenly feels unfamiliar. Life gives people these moments constantly. Moments where reality whispers, "You cannot continue like this forever." Some ignore the whisper. Others listen. And those who listen often begin changing slowly. Not dramatically, slowly. That's another truth modern culture misunderstands. Transformation is usually boring, quiet, repetitive, uncelebrated. There are no movie soundtracks when someone wakes up early consistently. No applause when someone controls their emotions during stress. No audience when someone chooses discipline over impulse. But those invisible decisions reshape destiny over time. That's how identity changes. Tiny actions repeated long enough become character. And character quietly shapes an entire life. A man who becomes stronger emotionally begins experiencing reality differently. Stress still exists, but panic decreases. Problems still happen, but resilience increases. Pain still arrives, but suffering becomes more manageable because internal stability changes external experience. This is why some people remain peaceful in difficult circumstances while others collapse during relatively small inconveniences. Again, the difficulty is not always the problem. Capacity is. And capacity can be built. That's the hopeful part many people forget. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. You can become mentally stronger, emotionally calmer, more disciplined, more focused, more patient, but only if you stop waiting for life to become easier first. That waiting destroys years. People postpone growth constantly. I'll start when things calm down. I'll focus on myself after this stressful period. I'll become disciplined once life becomes more stable. But life rarely becomes stable on its own. Chaos is permanent. Responsibilities never fully disappear. There will always be another problem, another pressure, another uncertainty. And if your growth depends on perfect conditions, you will remain stuck forever. That realization can either depress you or liberate you. Because once you stop expecting ease from life, you stop feeling betrayed by difficulty. You begin understanding that struggle is not interruption. It is the path itself. And strangely, accepting that makes life lighter. Not easier, lighter. Because resistance creates exhaustion. Reality becomes less painful once you stop arguing with its nature. Rain falls. People leave. Bodies age. Money fluctuates. Plans fail. Stress happens. This is life. And mature strength comes from adaptation, not denial. That's why emotionally resilient people focus heavily on what they can control. Their habits, their mindset, their reactions, their discipline, their integrity, their effort. Because control over self creates stability even when the external world feels unstable. And maybe that's what many adults are truly searching for. Not happiness, not endless pleasure, but inner steadiness. A sense that they can handle life without collapsing internally. A sense of self-respect. A quiet confidence built through endured difficulty. Because confidence built from comfort is fragile. But confidence built from surviving hard seasons becomes unshakable. And the older you get, the more valuable that becomes. At some point, life stops being about proving yourself to others. It becomes about becoming someone you can live with peacefully, someone you trust, someone you respect, someone who does not abandon themselves during difficult seasons. That's real maturity, not appearance, not status, not image, inner reliability. And ironically, that kind of strength often creates the peace people spent years searching for externally. Not because life suddenly improves, but because they improve. Which brings us back to Jim Rohn's words. Don't wish it were easier. Wish you were better. It sounds simple, but hidden inside that sentence is an entirely different approach to life. An approach built on responsibility instead of blame. Growth instead of avoidance, strength instead of comfort addiction, and perhaps most importantly, hope instead of helplessness. Because if your suffering comes only from the world, you are powerless. But if part of your suffering comes from weakness, then strength becomes possible, and possibility changes everything. Even now, there are people listening to this who feel tired beyond explanation. People carrying invisible emotional weight. People silently grieving wasted years. People terrified time is moving too fast. People pretending to be okay because responsibility leaves no room to fall apart. This message is for them, not as motivation, but as truth. Your life may never become easier, but you can become stronger, calmer, wiser, more disciplined, more emotionally resilient. And that changes the entire experience of being alive. The storm may remain, but the person standing inside it becomes different. And maybe that is the real purpose of hardship. Not destruction, construction. Life pressures people constantly because pressure reveals structure. Weak foundations crack. Strong foundations endure. So every difficult season asks the same question. What are you becoming through this? Bitter? Passive? Hopeless? Or stronger? More grounded? More awake? Because suffering either deepens consciousness or deepens resentment. And the direction often depends on whether someone chooses growth or victimhood. That choice is quieter than people imagine. It happens in ordinary moments. The decision to continue. The decision to stay disciplined. The decision to stop lying to yourself. The decision to take responsibility for your future even after painful failures. Those small moments matter enormously. Because destiny is rarely one giant decision. It is accumulated behavior, accumulated discipline, accumulated avoidance. accumulated excuses, accumulated courage. Every day slowly votes for the person you become, and eventually the votes become identity. That's why consistency matters more than intensity. Anyone can feel inspired temporarily. Very few people remain committed quietly, especially when nobody notices, especially when progress feels invisible, especially when life feels heavy. But those are the moments character is built, not during comfort, during resistance. And perhaps one of the most peaceful realizations a human being can reach is this: you do not need a perfect life to become a strong person. You only need willingness. Willingness to confront yourself honestly. Willingness to endure discomfort. Willingness to stop escaping your own potential. Because deep down, most people already know what they need to do. The issue is rarely information. It's avoidance. And avoidance always charges interest over time. Ignored health becomes illness. Ignored emotions become bitterness. Ignored discipline becomes regret. Ignored years become identity. That's why time feels cruel to people who refuse growth. But to those who embrace growth, time becomes an ally. Because every difficult year becomes wisdom. Every failure becomes perspective. Every hardship becomes emotional depth. And eventually something remarkable happens. The same person who once begged life to become easier becomes someone capable of handling difficult things calmly. Not perfectly, but steadily, quietly, with dignity. And maybe that is success in its deepest form. Not fame, not wealth alone, but becoming someone life cannot easily destroy internally. A person with emotional endurance, self-respect, inner peace. A person who no longer fears hardship because hardship became teacher instead of enemy. That transformation changes everything. Because when a human being becomes stronger internally, even ordinary life begins feeling meaningful again. The morning feels different. Conversations feel different. Silence feels different. You stop running from yourself. And when that happens, life becomes less about surviving each day and more about living intentionally. Not perfectly, not endlessly happy, but awake, present, capable, alive. So tonight, or tomorrow morning, or during some quiet moment nobody else sees, ask yourself honestly, have you been waiting for life to become easier while avoiding becoming stronger? And if the answer hurts, good. Painful honesty is often the beginning of transformation. Not dramatic transformation, real transformation. The slow kind, the lasting kind, the kind built quietly in darkness before anyone else notices. Because in the end, life does not reward wishful thinking. It rewards growth. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is not failure. It is reaching the end of your life and realizing you spent decades asking for lighter burdens instead of building stronger shoulders.